there's people back, there's stores opening. But our poorest people and our hardest hit areas are out to the east. And reconnecting the city to Araniri, Bexley, Brighton, out to the estuary and the Eastern Sea is equally as important. Business is business, and securing now the well-being of people, communities, human capability development, education fund is equally as important in my book. So,
David,
yep.
Sorry, no, you finish, please.
No, fire ahead.
I was just going to say, what's the issue then that's sort of holding this up from moving forward? Is it money, or is it the 100 million, which is not insignificant, or is it land?
The fundamental issue right now is access to land, because at the moment we have invested just under $600,000 of public trust money and voluntary time in the design and the business case, but we have no asset on which to talk to investors to secure them. And to be fair to Regenerate Christchurch, for example, they too see the value in this project, but we're hidebound by sort of processes and legislation and you know, people will always talk about when will the city be finished. Well, cities aren't finished, and the residential red zone may never be finished. They adapt. And what we're saying is, let's not circumvent the process, but let's expedite it and get on with the only true international investors who've come to the party and want to help us out.
Good on you. Thank you, David. Appreciate your time. That is the Eden Project New Zealand Trust member, David Simmons, who's also a Lincoln University tourism professor, by the way, obviously supporting the Eden Project. Alrighty, another sort of crazy TV program that has just come to our screens, which I can't bring myself to watch. I don't know whether you two have. It is about two people who've never met before. They get married and then find out if they're right for one another. It's another typically edited show. It involves creating a villain, a vacuous type, and apparently draws us in to watch complete strangers in very awkward situations. It hasn't drawn me in. Has it drawn either of you two in?
I absolutely watched the first episode and tweeted throughout.
Good man, Ben. Good man.
If anyone wants some great Married at First Sight tweeting, at Ben Thomas NZ.
Good for you.
Get off.
Hashtag MAFSNZ.
Let me ask you, did you originally watch it because it was going to be a sort of ironic hate watch, or and then you became passionate about it, or what was going on in your mind?
I think everybody starts watching those shows, you know, in a kind of ironic way. But ultimately, I think people like seeing a different kind of person on TV from, you know, airbrushed celebrities or, you know, drama or acted drama. And I think New Zealand reality TV shows, we're still at a stage in our culture where you do see, you know, a slightly more sort of genuine kind of person on than the sort of, you know, auditioning celebrities that, you know, now make up, you know, the entirety of the American sort of
There's
reality TV.
There's a kind of naivety to them, isn't there? It's like they're not quite aware that there's a camera crew.
I remember the first episode or the first season of Big Brother Australia. You know, this was many years ago, but when it had first become a sort of worldwide sensation, and in America and in Europe, you know, people were having sex in spa pools and getting naked and having fights and drama, whereas in Australia they just sat on the couch and drank VB.
But just quickly, do you think it makes a joke of marriage?
No, marriage makes a joke of marriage, Ali. I think you'll find.
Ben? Yeah, no.
Look, if this is what it takes, then
all right,
then marriage wasn't in great shape.
Got to go. Top of the hour, and we have news. Thanks to our panel.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, the latest from Las Vegas, of course. Lone gunman Stephen Paddock opens fire on concertgoers, killing at least 59, injuring hundreds more. Who was he? Why was he doing this? And will it encourage the US to finally rethink its gun laws? Sir Michael Cullen has just released his report into the infrastructure and circumstances that led to the breach of the flood wall in Edgecumbe in April. I have just spoken to him, a man in his 40s charged with historical sex offences at Gloriavale, who's had his name suppression extended. Aid finally arrives in Vanuatu, courtesy of an Air Force Herc. Tom Petty fans gather, and much more. We'll be back after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. An independent report into the catastrophic failure of Edgecumbe Stop Bank has found residents were not sufficiently aware of the flood risk and there were no evacuation plans. The review, led by Sir Michael Cullen, was commissioned by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council after half the town was flooded in early April this year. Tom Furley reports.
Sir Michael has told journalists at the report's release in Whakatane this afternoon that the College Road flood bank failed because water found its way underneath the wall. He says the seepage may have been increased by flaws in the foundation of the wall and damage from the town's 1987 earthquake and 2004 flood. However, he says it wasn't up to the panel to point blame and says no one changed the way the flood spillways or adjoining dam were managed could have prevented it. The report has 29 recommendations. It was initially due to be completed by July, but the review panel was given extra time because of the amount of complex information. From Whakatane, Tom Furley.
A Defence Force C-130 Hercules has landed at Pekoa International Airport on Espiritu Santo with $250,000 worth of relief supplies on board. The supplies are in response to a direct request from Vanuatu to New Zealand. Roy Hawkins was at the airport when the Hercules touched down.
The relief supplies include 800 tarpaulins, 800 hygiene kits and 200 mother and baby kits and 5 generators. 2 Defence Force personnel, an environmental health specialist and a logistics expert will be assisting the Vanuatu disaster authorities to make sure they get to the people who need it the most. Local disaster officials at the airport expressed their gratitude for the supplies, saying they will go a long way towards improving conditions for evacuees. According to the latest estimates, there are more than 5,200 people registered in 36 evacuation centres on Santo. The final boatload of evacuees from Ambai Island is expected to arrive later this afternoon. In Vanuatu, Roy Hawkins.
The FBI says investigators have found no links between the Las Vegas gunman who killed at least 59 people at a country music festival and any international terrorist organisation. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack, saying that the gunman, Stephen Paddock, converted to Islam earlier this year. This claim is also denied by his family. Our Washington correspondent Simon Marks reports.
The flag is flying at half-mast at the White House, where President Trump had this to say about the murderous attack by gunman Stephen Paddock.
It was an act of pure evil.
He'll visit Las Vegas on Wednesday. There, the FBI's Aaron Rouse is heading the investigation.
We have determined to this point no connection with an international terrorist group.
Which leaves one big question. Why did Stephen Paddock, a man with no criminal record, unleash such deadly violence from the 32nd floor of Mandalay Bay?
A Kiwi who owns a gun range tourist attraction in Las Vegas says an overhaul of gun rules and regulations is desperately needed in the United States. Genghis Cohen of Machine Guns Vegas says currently buyers of more destructive weapons or large quantities of ammunition don't have to meet a higher threshold.
The loopholes that exist in the gun industry right now, especially with the weapons that this person had, are going to be looked at, I think, under a fine-tooth comb, and I think a lot of things will probably change.
Genghis Cohen says in some states people can walk into a gun shop and get a firearm immediately. The acting mayor of Hastings says her heart goes out to the family who lost their 10-year-old son in a fire in the city yesterday. He was killed when flames sped through an abandoned building where he was playing with 2 others. A 9-year-old boy was injured in the flames and has been transferred to the burns unit in Hutt Hospital. A 3rd boy, aged 7, escaped harm. Sandra Hazelhurst says this is a very sad day for the community.
We are supporting the whānau and the community and providing any counselling support that may be required, and also supporting the younger members of the community with holiday programs to show our support and show that we're there and how much we're feeling for them.
Hastings Acting Mayor Sandra Hazelhurst. Scene examinations by fire and police teams have been completed, but the investigation is still continuing. 5 men have been charged over the killings of an uncle and nephew whose bodies were found in the Mamaku forest in Bay of Plenty. Raymond and James Fleet were reported missing in August and their bodies were found a week later. Eva Corlett reports.
The police say the men who have been arrested are facing numerous charges, including murder, manslaughter and accessory after the fact, as well as drug charges. They range in age from 34 to 21. Rotorua's Area Commander Inspector Anaru Piwhairangi says the case is extremely rare in Rotorua and has shocked the community. 4 of the men are expected to appear in Rotorua District Court tomorrow. The 5th man will appear in Whakatane District Court. Ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
It's 5:05. Sport and the New Zealand team to next year's Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in Australia is set to be the nation's biggest. Today marks 6 months until the Games begin, and the New Zealand team chef de mission Rob Waddell expects the team will top 250 athletes by the time final selections are made in February. The biggest team New Zealand has sent to a Commonwealth Games was in 2006 to Melbourne, when 249 athletes competed.
Just shows the evolution of our high performance culture, that we're improving and we're having these these quality athletes being able to put forward all the time. And it's very important for New Zealand. You think about a lot of our sports like squash and bowls and some of the wrestling disciplines that might not otherwise get to go to an Olympic Games. So it's an essential pinnacle event for those sports.
Rob Waddell. The Australian netballers are focusing on containing young New Zealand defender Kelly Jury ahead of the opening Constellation Cup test against the Silver Ferns in Auckland on Thursday night. New Zealand trounced Australia by 10 goals in their last encounter in Invercargill to win the Quad Series title, with the 20-year-old Jury causing all sorts of problems for Australian shooter Caitlin Bassett. The Diamonds coach Lisa Alexander admits Jury has played on their minds since that loss. A failure to meet fitness standards has cost veteran cricket international Rachel Priest a place in the White Ferns side for their upcoming series against Pakistan. The 32-year-old Priest, who's played 86 one-day internationals, has been left out of the 14-strong squad. That's the news.
Horror in Las Vegas.
We heard pop, 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 pop countless of times, and we all thought it was firecrackers.
People just start dropping like flies. Somebody says, "He's reloading, run," and everybody just gets up and starts running. And you see people just getting trampled.
Everyone was just like literally laying on top of each other, trying to get out of the way, and the shots just kept coming.
He had at least 10 high-powered rifles with him.
The smoke detectors had gone off. They had detected the smoke from the weapon of the repeated firing.
News as it breaks. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, New Zealand's investment watchdog on how to protect yourself from scams and dodgy deals. And after 10, employing ex-offenders to clean up rivers, how it's improving the environment and reducing reoffending. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel. Fine spells, isolated showers, mainly in the west. Waitomo to Vanuatu, including Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Fine spells, isolated showers, mostly confined to the ranges tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine apart from a few showers today, mainly about the ranges of Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers about the Tararua range and a few evening showers for Canterbury. Pulla, Westland and Fiordland, isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Otago and Southland, mostly fine, however showers spreading north tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers today, mostly fine tomorrow, but cloud increasing towards evening with possible drizzle. It's coming up to 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, and thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome. Coming up, the flooding of Edgecumbe and the report into what happened, why and whether it could have been prevented. We talked to Sir Michael Cullen. We talk later in the program to the Regional Council. The Air Force arrives with aid in Vanuatu. Our man Karoy Hawkins is there. We go to him, but first, police say they found at least 42 more firearms, explosives and thousands of rounds of ammunition following a raid at the Nevada home of Las Vegas gunman Stephen Paddock. The 64-year-old retiree killed at least 59 people and injured more than 500 others as he showered bullets on the crowd at a country music concert from the 32nd floor of his room in the nearby Mandalay Bay Hotel. In a moment, we'll speak with our correspondent in Las Vegas, Patrice Howard, but first, here's Sharon Brett Kelly.
A cell phone captures the moment gunman Stephen Paddock took fire.
Where we going? Let's go. Hayden, stop.
And then the terror and confusion as the gunfire paused and 22,000 concert goers tried to comprehend what was going on. And then panic as people took cover and the gunfire started again. Behind the concert venue, sheets billowed in the wind. 2 windows blown out on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay hotel room where Paddock took aim last night, shooting dozens dead and injuring more than 500 others before turning the gun on himself.
It didn't stop. It did not stop. Boom, 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 and then one after the other. And we were laying down on the floor. I didn't know to get up, to run, to stay, to duck. Didn't know if it was safe to move because just of everything that was going on. It was really scary.
Sydney Sievers and Sarah Haas were among the 22,000 enjoying the Las Vegas Country Music Festival.
It was a scary time in my life. I thought it was over. I really did. It's scary.
You said it's the scariest time of your life?
Oh, heck yeah. I honestly thought we were done. I had no idea where my mom was. All I had was her. We met some people and latched onto them. That's all we had. There's just a lot of flight or fight. Everybody just starts running. Everyone's on the ground. Everybody's yelling. Everyone's confused. No one knows what's really going on. Everyone thought it might have been fireworks, but it was, you could hear the gunshots. You understood what it was. Yeah. You couldn't miss it.
Las Vegas police say the 64-year-old gunman Stephen Paddock had no criminal history and lived in a retirement village about 90 minutes drive from Las Vegas. His brother Eric was in shock.
He went to college, he had a job. We owned some apartments, we sold some apartments. There's nothing. There was no
indication at all.
Nothing. That's what's so... I can't even make something up. There's nothing.
Eric Paddock said he had been watching the television and realised it could have been his own children at the concert.
My brother just killed 50-plus people. How does that affect me? I got this headache right now, strangely enough.
Former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot in the head following an attack in 2011. She and her husband, retired astronaut Mark Kelly, held a press conference calling for tighter gun controls.
Despite senseless, deadly gun-related domestic violence, despite an epidemic of preventable suicides, despite the problem of toddlers shooting toddlers and their parents, the response from Congress has been to do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Incredibly, Congress is currently working on legislation that would weaken our gun laws.
Mr. Kelly said the massacre would have been worse if Paddock's gun had a silencer.
Imagine the confusion for first responders if they arrived on the scene to a bunch of civilians wielding their own guns, attempting to return fire. Imagine the gun lobby's version of society. Everyone armed, everyone out for themselves, everyone at risk all of the time. Folks, that's just going backwards. We do not have to live this way.
At the White House, US President Donald Trump and his deputy Mike Pence held a moment's silence to remember those who lost their lives and those who were injured.
It was an act of pure evil. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are working closely with local authorities to assist with the investigation, and they will provide updates as to the investigation and how it develops.
The preliminary death toll, which officials warn could rise further, makes the attack the deadliest in America's history since last year's massacre of 49 people at an Orlando nightclub by a gunman who pledged allegiance to Islamic State militants. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
Real tensions, obviously, between those who support the Second Amendment and those demanding greater gun control. We will talk about those tensions with the American ambassador to New Zealand later in the program. But our correspondent in Las Vegas is Patrice Howard. I spoke with her shortly before we came on air, and we began with the official death toll.
59 dead confirmed, more than 520 injured right now after that shooting. So that's where that stands.
And with so many people injured, being shot with the sorts of weapons that Paddock was using, the death toll is expected to rise, is it?
Exactly. Police here in Las Vegas say that right now what they are doing is working to connect families with victims, with those who have been shot. Of course, we saw many die, but we saw many more injured. And so what they're doing is opening small areas on the ground here where families can connect. They have a hotline, and really they're just trying to unite people who were injured with those who are looking for them right now.
And of course, it being Vegas and it being a concert in Vegas, one imagines that a great many of the people who are injured and of course have been killed will have come from somewhere else.
That's right. I mean, people come to Las Vegas because it's a vacation destination. It's a place to have fun. The people who were gathered there in that crowd were there for a country music concert on a beautiful night here in Las Vegas on the Strip, right in the heart of the city. And so for something like this to happen, people are walking around here a bit shocked. You can tell that the mood shifted quite significantly because this happened really right in the middle of a very vibrant area, a place that draws tourists from around the world. And many of those affected are coming from around the world. We're starting to hear not only the victims, but also those who were injured in this attack be identified. And they're really coming from across the country and the world.
And that brings us, of course, to the man responsible for this slaughter, and his name is Stephen Paddock. And this sort of inexplicable hatred, the degree of his enmity for strangers. Does anyone understand where this came from and why?
Well, let's start with his brother. Eric Paddock gave an interview to U.S. media earlier today, and he essentially said he has no idea where this came from. He said that he is shocked to know that his brother had the kind of weapons that he had, semi-automatic or automatic weapons that did such damage to the crowd down below there, the Mandalay. This is a man without a military background or anything like that. So right now, not only is this man's family trying to figure out how this came to be, why this man planned this attack, but police and law enforcement officials are wondering how he got his hands on such a dangerous and destructive weapon, which even with gun laws here in the United States, and they're especially loose here in the state of Nevada, that is a hard weapon to get your hands on. It's not often used in crime, so that is a big question in this case.
Patrice, in the hours afterwards, as all of this was unfolding last night, IS came out and said that he was connected to them. There is no one who is taking this seriously, is there?
There is not, especially the law enforcement community here. They made sure to come out and say early on that they don't believe that there is any connection to an international terrorist group, though they did claim association with the attack, as they have in previous incidents. They say that they are still very much looking for the motive. What would cause this man who lives just 80 miles north of the Las Vegas Strip to drive down here to barricade himself inside a hotel room for 3 days straight and to essentially unleash terror on the city? It's very unclear right now, and that's really what they're working to get to the bottom of.
And Patrice, once again, this has such a familiar pattern, doesn't it? That the calls for gun control begin. The people who don't want to discuss gun control send their thoughts and prayers. That phrase keeps getting used almost ad infinitum. Will America be able to respond in a meaningful way this time, or is the situation still as bitterly divided, gun control versus Second Amendment, as it's ever been?
Exactly. Talk about the most political and the most politicized issue in the U.S., gun control. So often, and when something like this happens, you start to see voices emerge. Twitter has made that very easy. You can literally go on and see both sides fighting with each other, and people in the public calling for them not to do that, to focus instead on the people who were injured, the people who died. We, of course, heard from Press Secretary Sarah Sanders earlier, and she basically said that it's not the time to talk about
Yes.
policy or to talk about gun restrictions. So certainly a politicized issue here, but one that people hope will not be.
It seems very difficult to find the time in which people want to talk about gun control on some sides in the United States. That's the big picture. The little picture, of course, is what's happening in Vegas right now. As you say, this is a holiday town. As you say, this is a place where people come to escape and lose their money and have a bit of fun. What is it like on the streets now?
It's just a little bit quieter than usual when it comes to the tourists and the way that they're walking around and enjoying the city. And the big reason for that is the increased law enforcement presence. Just walking down on the strip here and through the hotel that I'm staying at, you can just feel the increased police presence. They're looking at you. They're making sure that not only is the public safe, but that the institutions that they're here to protect are safe. The landmarks and the hotels and these big structures that people come to marvel at, the big shows and the casinos, they're all very open and free on a typical night. You know, people are strolling through, they're having drinks, they're gambling. But tonight it's just a little bit tighter. The doors are shut. You know, people are filing in a little bit slower. There's just a different mood in the city, but people are also giving back. They're giving blood. They're taking time off their vacation to see what they can do to help the victims. And so that is something right now, the hashtag Vegas Strong is trending, and that really is what the city is trying to be right now in a very difficult time.
Patrice Howard from Las Vegas, and as I said earlier, the US Ambassador will join us to discuss gun control, Second Amendment and his own gun ownership later in the program. In breaking news, this just to hand, American rock legend Tom Petty has died aged 66. His manager confirmed the death of the influential singer, songwriter and multi-instrumentalist who achieved great success both as a solo artist and with his band Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers a few minutes ago. Tom Petty was rushed to the hospital last night after having a cardiac arrest at his Malibu home. Since then, reports of his well-being or otherwise have varied greatly and been somewhat contradictory, but there is confirmation now from his manager that he has died. Born in 1950 in Gainesville, Florida, a young Tom Petty decided to become a musician after seeing the Beatles perform on TV. He showed little interest in school and dropped out at the age of 17 to co-found the band Mudcrutch, but he found fame with the Heartbreakers. Of course, their self-titled first album was released in November 1976. Many of you will remember it. Here's his views on being part of the soundtrack to so many people's lives.
People often stop me and say, "Hey, thanks, you've been the soundtrack of my life," you know? They do say that to me, that, you know, you've been my soundtrack, and it's kind of a good feeling that you've been through somebody's life, you know, and you've played a part in kind of, you know, you've been kind of the background music to a lot of events in their life, and it means the songs mean something to people. What more can you ask for? You know, if you're going to be a songwriter and have a rock and roll band, what more can you ask for than for those songs to touch somebody that way? It's just beautiful.
Into the great wide open, under them skies of blue, out in the great wide open, a rebel without a crew.
The music, of course, of Tom Petty. His manager has confirmed he has died at the age of 66. 24 and a half past 5, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, a man charged with historical sexual offences at Gloriavale has his name suppression extended, and a Carterton man diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2014 has made what's being described as miraculous recovery after receiving treatment overseas costing nearly $200,000. We'd love to hear from you. Anything you'd like to discuss tonight, and you may be a Tom Petty fan who just wants to talk about what his music has meant to you. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and email us, of course, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We turn now to the findings of the independent review of the Rangataiki River scheme, perhaps better known as the breach in the flood wall at College Road in Edgecumbe, causing the destruction of 15 homes and extensive damage to a further 250. This was in April, of course, as ex-tropical cyclone Debbie deluged Bay of Plenty with huge volumes of rainwater. The rain was at historically high levels, but could more have been done to prevent or reduce the consequences? Could warnings have been sounded earlier? Well, the answer is a bit of yes and a bit of no. The panel was concerned, and I quote, that there has been insufficient attention paid to the risks faced by the Edgecumbe community while the Rangataiki River scheme was being upgraded, end quote. And as the rain fell, why weren't alarm bells ringing? Again, a quote from the panel. It seems somewhat surprising that there were not warnings about high river levels posing possible inundation risks to the community. Now, shortly before we came on air, I spoke to the chair of the review panel, Sir Michael Cullen, about whether the flood would have been less damaging had long delayed work on the floodway and spillway actually been completed.
If the Reed floodway and spillway had been completed according to the kind of design which was originally approved and consented, it probably would have made a very limited difference because of some issues around that design. If it had been completed according to the kind of designs that we are suggesting in the report, that is a much wider floodway down to the end near the sea and a low fixed spillway, then quite a significant amount of water would have been diverted, and possibly that could have made a difference. But that, of course, is not even consented at this point. So we're a long way from achieving that situation.
And you say that in the report, the Reed's floodway and spillway are still some way off. Are you surprised by the fact that after all this time that is still the case?
Well, I think the problem is that issues emerged after 2009 with the proposal which had been accepted and had been consented. It became clear the optimal solution. But then working through all the issues around what was the optimal solution became more and more complex and involved, for example, building higher stop banks further up the river at significant cost. So all this was on the planning horizon, if you like. Unfortunately, the flood came along before completion. What we're really saying is that the Regional Council needs to get urgently now with consultation with the community around the low fixed spillway option, which is probably the best, particularly from the perspective of the urban community in Edgecumbe and the smaller settlements downstream, and then get on with the work that requires to be done to make that happen. Longer term, we are looking to really a change of philosophy in allowing the river more room to move and less constriction between narrow high stop banks, because that kind of mid-20th century technological solution is becoming less and less in favour around the world because of the problems which arise when you keep doing that kind of thing. And Louisiana is a good example of that writ large.
You say it is extremely fortunate that no one was seriously injured or killed as a result of the College Road flood wall failure. And you talk about a surprising lack of a warning. So the fact no one was killed, the fact that the consequences weren't more grave, is good luck rather than good management?
A bit of good management at the end by quite a few people, including fire service personnel and regional council personnel who were able to get people in direct path out pretty quickly before things happened. It was concern already building up half an hour, 45 minutes before things actually happened at College Road. But that's a pretty narrow time. And what we are saying is that there really needs to be, at least until the Reed's floodway and spillway are complete, it needs to be trigger points which are much more realistic for evacuating people from those urban areas. And there's many hours available because you're getting reasonably decent information well upriver, well above Matahina Dam, which tells you that there are likely to be serious problems. And the kind of flood we had here, the kind of river levels, were one of three very high peaks that we had since 1940. So these are not that common events, although likely to become more common, of course, with climate change.
Sir Michael Cullen, it's a long report. It's only come out after 4 o'clock. After 6 o'clock, we will talk to the head of the Regional Council about what happened and what more they could have done to protect that community. A Carterton man diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2014 has made what's being described as a miraculous recovery after receiving treatment costing nearly $200,000. Now, Nick Perkins, who became virtually blind in one eye and suffered extreme fatigue as a result of the illness, says the risky treatment paid off after 11 weeks in the hospital and he can now participate fully with his family. Te Anawa Huri Hanganui has more.
Multiple sclerosis affects around 4,000 New Zealanders. It's a disease which damages areas of the brain, spinal cord and optic nerves, causing problems with vision, balance and muscle control. 34-year-old father of three, Nick Perkins, says the disease meant he couldn't spend quality time with his young children.
The kids couldn't really spend time with me. They couldn't play. I was just so tired all the time that I was no fun to be around for them. The whole burden of having this degenerative disease kind of takes over your life. Everything in life was about MS rather than anything else.
He spent a year fundraising for the treatment, which involves removing a patient's existing stem cells, undergoing chemotherapy to stop the disease from attacking the body, and then putting the stem cells back in. Nick Perkins travelled to Singapore to have the treatment, a decision that came with a $170,000 price tag and a high chance of complications. Wife Danielle Perkins says she explained the whole process as best she could to her 5- and 3-year-olds.
So they knew that Dad's brain wasn't working as it should be, and because his brain wasn't working properly, it caused him to have a sore leg and caused him to be tired. And so we just told them that Dad was going, over on a big plane overseas to have an operation, basically, to fix his brain.
Nick Perkins says the risk was worth it, and he came home after the treatment a new man.
The fatigue and stuff had gone almost immediately. I've since been to the neurologist and they've measured that there's effectively no measurable disability that I'm displaying. So I'm just can carry on and live life normally, which is so amazing.
The Multiple Sclerosis Society says there is a growing number of New Zealanders travelling abroad to receive the treatment, and many are coming home with positive results. They say it's not offered here because stem cell therapy studies show it is still an experimental treatment. Stem cell transplants are available in Australia and the UK, but only under specific study protocols with strict guidelines. Robert Irving from Auckland is among those wanting the treatment after living with the disease for 13 years. He suffered from fatigue, pain in his legs, and both of his hands are completely numb. He says he is doing everything he can to save the $50,000 it is going to cost to get the treatment in Russia.
Initially, my plan was to sell shares, but that all collapsed about the time I needed the money. So then I tried selling cars and stuff.
Are you still hoping to get this treatment?
Oh, yes, I'm still working towards collecting enough money.
Nick Perkins says there is a 20% chance of regression from the treatment, but says even if symptoms hold off for another 15 years, he will be happy. He has set up a charity called Kicking MS in the Nick of Time to help other sufferers of MS get access to the treatment overseas. For Checkpoint, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui aho.
Coming up on the programme, in Auckland Church housing the homeless as it faces a $160,000 bill to upgrade its facilities so it can keep helping homeless people. Aid finally arrives in Vanuatu via an Air Force Herc. The US Ambassador joins us later to talk gun control. Jonathan Mitchell next with business news. But before all of that, Katrina with the headlines.
Sir Michael Cullen's investigation into the Edgecumbe flood has found residents were not sufficiently aware of the flood risk and there were no evacuation plans. The flood bank failed because water found its way underneath the wall, and Sir Michael says the seepage may have been increased by flaws in the foundation of the wall and damage from the town's 1987 earthquake and 2004 flood. However, he says it wasn't up to the panel to point blame and says no one change to the way the flood spillways or adjoining dam were managed could have prevented the disaster. The legendary rocker Tom Petty has died after suffering a heart attack at his California home. He was rushed to a nearby hospital in Santa Monica on life support. The 66-year-old had just finished a huge tour which wrapped up at the Hollywood Bowl Arena in Los Angeles last week. The Defence Force has delivered $250,000 worth of relief supplies to Espiritu Santo in Vanuatu, including 800 tarpaulins, 800 hygiene kits, 200 mother and baby kits and 5 generators. Local disaster officials say the supplies will go a long way towards improving conditions for the 5,000 evacuees from Ambai fleeing the island's erupting volcano. Investigators in Las Vegas are gathering evidence on the worst mass shooting by a lone gunman in US history, putting the country's gun laws under scrutiny again. Hospitals have been struggling to cope with the number of wounded. The closest level 1 trauma hospital is at capacity and hundreds of patients are being sent to other hospitals across the city. 5 men have been charged over the killings of an uncle and nephew whose bodies were found in the Mamaku forest in Bay of Plenty. Raymond and James Fleet went missing in August and their bodies were discovered a week later. The men, aged from 21 to 34, are facing numerous charges including murder and manslaughter as well as drug charges. Rotorua's area commander says the case is extremely rare in Rotorua and has shocked the community. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with our reporter Jonathan Mitchell beaming in from Wellington. Hi, Jono. What does the latest quarterly survey of business opinion that you previewed last night tell us about business opinion?
Well, the election campaign didn't do business optimism any favours, John. If we look at the latest figures, fell to a seasonally adjusted net 7%, and that was from 17% in the June quarter. That's not entirely surprising. Markets, businesses don't like political uncertainty, so consumers and companies are more cautious in the near term about spending and investing. If we break it down to the sector level, the weakest sentiment came in the building and services sectors. That slowing housing market and acute skills shortage are still at play there. But if we go longer term, the Institute of Economic Research says the hiring and investment intentions are strong, so there's some good indicators for the long term. The economy is growing at around 3%. That's expected to stay that way for the foreseeable future, and the Reserve Bank is likely to stay on hold for at least another 12 months.
Thanks, Jono. A voice very familiar to listeners of RNZ National has decided to call it a day. A well-known business commentator with, I think, the country's biggest bank, right?
That's right. You'll be familiar with the name Cameron Bagri. He's been, as you say, a familiar voice on RNZ News for many, many years. He's decided to resign from ANZ Bank as their chief economist, take a few months out, recharge the batteries, then go into a new venture. He's been one of our more accessible and colourful commentators. He's managed to cut through a lot of that heavy economic jargon and data. That's not an easy job from my experience, and given us a clear understanding of what's going on now and in the future in his own way. A bit of humour, a bit of jargon, a bit of alliteration, always entertaining, and we'll certainly miss that, and I'm sure our audience will as well.
John, what happened on the markets today?
Pretty much the same as yesterday. Fairly quiet start to the week. Rose a handful of points to 7,933. A Kiwi dollar is weaker though, 71.6 US cents, 91.8 Australian. The Reserve Bank of Australia, as expected, has left their cash rate on hold at 1.5%.
Jonathan Mitchell with Business News Live from Wellington. Thank you very much indeed. A man charged with historical sexual offences at the West Coast religious community of Gloriavale has had his name suppression extended. The man in his 40s was arrested in September on 2 charges of unlawful sexual connection and 2 charges of indecent assault. Our reporter Logan Church was at the court this morning.
So, John, I'm standing outside the Greymouth District Courts where the man had his name suppression extended. This is the second time the case has been put before the court. He made an appearance last week. Police say that the man, who is in his 40s, has been charged with 2 counts of indecent assault and 2 counts of unlawful sexual contact. And the police say that this was made in direct relation to ongoing investigations into historic sex offences at the West Coast community of Gloriavale. And I understand that this man was at Gloriavale at the time of these offences.
What can you tell us about Gloriavale for people who aren't familiar with that community, Logan?
So Gloriavale is an isolated West Coast community. They practice quite a literal translation of the Bible, a very Christian community. According to their websites, they have about 90 families living in the community where they remain isolated from the rest of the world by choice. And they're very self-sufficient, though. In fact, they have quite a thriving economy. They have dairying as one of their main industries. They have, according to their website, over 1,000 head of dairy cows. They also have a deer herd, forest plantations. They even have their own aircraft company where they own and operate 3 light aircrafts carrying out charters across the South Island. So quite a productive community, but certainly an isolated community that's attracted quite its fair share of media coverage over the last few years. There's of course been several documentaries made about the community, substantial media coverage. So there's certainly a lot of interest.
Yeah, a lot of interest in this case too. When is this man going to appear next? And is there any date on how long his name suppression extends for?
So the name suppression today has been extended another 3 weeks, where it will be discussed again. The man has been remanded until next week. It's unclear if he will be making an appearance then or not.
Logan Church from Greymouth. An Auckland church that's housing the homeless in its offices says it faces a $160,000 bill to upgrade its facilities so it can keep helping homeless people. The Faith Family Baptist Church in Panmure is providing budget accommodation to 15 people for $200 a week, but says it's turning away others each week because it has simply run out of space. Nita Blake-Person reports.
We've got 4 rooms, so 2 share the end room, 2 in this room. We have an office here, then we also have our sanctuary.
When Jason Ty took me on a tour of the church's facilities this morning, it didn't take long to see everything.
We come through here, this is our eating area, and then into our communal kitchen.
The small church has a congregation of just 25, but since 2015 it's been using its cramped offices to house people who would otherwise be on the streets, unable to afford Auckland rents. The offices have been transformed into small rooms with temporary partitions providing some privacy. Men sleep in one area and women are across the car park in another building. The church is also renting 2 houses across the road to put up 2 more families, but it says it is having to turn away people as it just can't fit anymore.
I think in the last week we had a mother and daughter, and then we had another mother and daughter who needed accommodation, but we couldn't take them on because we were too full.
Carla Parisi is the church's pastor.
We had to turn away a Middle Eastern family, father, mother and 2 children. So yeah, it's heartbreaking having to say we can't.
Carla Parisi says demand for the church's accommodation ramped up last year, and they now offer a 13-week program to help residents, some of whom have been bailed there, get back on their feet. That includes numeracy and literacy classes from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. every day, as well as budgeting classes and assistance with addiction and health issues. People wanting to stay don't have to join the congregation, but there is a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to alcohol, drugs and violence. Kim Morahu has been living at the church since her mum moved to the far north at the start of the year.
My goal is to get back on my own 2 feet, like Joseph and Jason. They take me in the gym and they're helping me, because I'm starting to walk without my frame, but I can walk so long and then I have to sit down sort of thing. It's a safe place, and that's what I don't think what I would have done if this wasn't here.
Miss Morahu has just $38 a week left over after she pays the church $200 a week in rent. The church recently doubled the rent to cover costs, including $3,000 monthly power bills. There is only one shower and limited kitchen facilities. The roof needs replacing, plumbing work needs to be done, and Carla Parisi says they want to reconfigure some of the spaces so that more people can stay.
We've got a little mini market that we have here too, so we're looking at doing more barbecues, hangies, and just selling food just to help us as well, to build up our finances. So yeah, we just rely on fundraising, everybody pulling money together.
The church gets no funding from the government but is now applying for $160,000 from Te Puni Kōkiri to help with its renovations. Joel Love lived at the church last year with his wife and child and now has his own place, but helps out at the church as a mentor and leader. He says the staff there have been helping people for years, but now it needs help too.
The more people that know, maybe the more people that would have invested interest in supporting this cause. Yeah, because this place has been doing it a lot longer than others, but have never really asked for help. But I think now is the time for us to ask for help. Yeah, the need is great.
For Checkpoint, ko Nita Blakeperson tēnei.
5:45. Families are being called on to stand up and take a stand against violence on children. A former head of the women's refuge organisation, Meripeka Reikawa Tate, made the call at the inquest into the death of 3-year-old Moko Rangitohereri, being held in Rotorua. Moko died in 2015 from abuse and violence inflicted on him by 2 adults who were supposed to be looking after the toddler. They both now are serving lengthy jail terms for manslaughter. Andrew McRae has been at the coroner's court in Rotorua.
94 children aged up to 14 were killed between 2007 and 2015. Moko Rangitohereri and 8 years earlier another toddler, Nia Glassy, are names that shame the country. Both died at the hands of their caregivers. Meripeka Reikawa Tate says better early intervention is essential to save the lives of children.
Families should not be portrayed as mad, bad or sad. This perception influences the willingness of family members, friends and the general public to intervene and take action if necessary.
She says not enough's invested in helping families because more appears to be spent after a tragic event than before.
Investing in families, don't see them as a cost. Invest with them and get people alongside of those families who they trust. Because there is this view in this country, Your Honour, where we don't trust our families to be able to look after themselves.
The coroner, Wallace Bain, summed it up.
The thrust of what you're telling me is something along, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Isn't that what you're telling me?
Yes, Your Honour.
And there are some wonderful moves now being put in place.
Dr Johan Moreau's been a paediatrician in Rotorua for 34 years. He says during his career he hasn't seen a comparable case to that of Moko.
For me, this is symptomatic of the level to which we as a country have undervalued our children and significant proportions of our people, and how collectively we've allowed our standards of support and care to fail.
Dr Moreau says many of his reflections and recommendations made after Nia Glassy died are similar to the ones he's now making after Moko's death.
We have as a society not been committed to resolving our issues and have made little or no impact on the issues of concern.
The Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, says it must not be forgotten that the responsibility for Moko's death lies with those convicted of his manslaughter and sentenced to 17 years in jail.
I do not want to minimise the fact that only those who inflicted the violence in this case could have guaranteed Moko's safety. And it is important in this exercise that we don't shift the primary blame from those two people.
Judge Beecroft says government agencies and at least 3 NGOs and family friends bear some responsibility for Moko's death.
Either missed or minimised or misinterpreted signals or evidence or what might be called red flags that should have prompted further investigation and collaborative intervention.
The coroner, Wallace Bain, has closed the inquest. He'll now go away and consider the evidence and report back later in the year. At the coroner's court in Rotorua for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
Some breaking news just before we move on. The Department of Internal Affairs has in the last half hour or so warned Destiny Church that 2 of its related charities will be deregistered if they don't file financial returns. The church has consistently ignored warning after warning from Internal Affairs for late filing. Last week we reported that its school, Destiny School, has asked for charitable help from another charity, Kids Can, to feed and clothe some of its students. Despite church leaders driving expensive sports cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in total, the 2 charities that face losing their tax-exempt charity status are part of Destiny Church's international arm. They have until the end of the month to file an objection or file their returns. We will have more on this story tomorrow night. We head now to the volcano on the island of Ambai in Vanuatu, or more correctly, we head to the neighbouring island of Espiritu Santo, as so many people from Ambai have done. RNZ Pacific reporter Koroi Hawkins is there. Yesterday we spoke to him at an evacuation centre as people asked for food, water and anything to shelter themselves beneath. Today we spoke to him as a New Zealand Air Force C-130 Hercules arrived on the island carrying what? Here's Koroi.
They brought in about $250,000 worth of relief supplies. There's 800 tarpaulins, 800 hygiene kits, and about 200 mother and baby kits, as well as some big storage containers to help with the water, I understand.
So, Koroi, in terms of the stuff we were talking about yesterday when we crossed to you at one of the evacuation camps, that really is what they were after, that kind of support, isn't it?
Yes, so this is a direct request from the Vanuatu government to New Zealand. So they've given them a list of supplies that are needed here, and they've brought all of that straight to Luganville here on Santo.
Right. And Koroi, is the bulk of the evacuees on Santo, the island you're on now?
So most of the ones that are supposed to come here have arrived. There's a final boat arriving this afternoon with a few 60 evacuees on it. So they are understood to be the last boat that's come in. Right now there's more than 5,200 registered evacuees in 36 registered evacuation centres, but authorities say those are figures as close as they can get. But they're in reality, considering a couple of thousand have gone to families, and there's also students that are in schools that aren't on that list. It's more like 7,000 people here now.
Which is basically half the island's population, isn't it? So is Ambai now empty? Is everyone off as far as you're aware?
I'm only aware that everyone that's supposed to come to Santo is off, so I'm not sure if there's still people there. I know that there are Vanuatu police, paramilitary personnel still on the island, so they'll be going around checking villages and making sure people are abiding with the compulsory evacuation. They will be the last to leave the island.
And Koroi, what is morale like? These people don't have insurance. They were smashed by Cyclone Pam. They have been forced to leave their homes. They are living in makeshift conditions on a neighbouring island. How are they all?
I tell you, John, like, it's hard to keep tears from your eyes when you go and speak to them in the camps. Like, some of them say they've never experienced anything as terrifying or traumatic as this. Having to flee your home island, only carrying what you can carry in your hand and bring your whole family out to a new place. They're all quite distraught, quite disoriented, and then to arrive to a place where all of the accommodation and food and supplies that was supposed to be there to meet you aren't ready. It's quite traumatic for a lot of these guys, and they're being really good about it. Like, people are taking the initiative to try and organize the centers themselves. The community here has been amazing. They've welcomed them into their homes and helped people out as much as they can. But this first lot of help that's arrived now is really welcome. And I understand there's more coming this afternoon. A Australian Hercules is also due to bring in more tents.
Koroi Hawkins from RNZ Pacific, who's gone up to Espiritu Santo and is filing for us from there. The sight of mass police smashing their way into polling stations was evidence, if any was needed, that Catalonia's independence drive has plunged Spain into its biggest political crisis for a generation. Today in Barcelona, the Catalan leadership have said they are not planning a traumatic split, but they want a new relationship with the central government in Madrid. The BBC's Damien Grammaticus reports from Barcelona.
Aquestes són les nostres armes. Aquestes són In the centre of Barcelona today, hundreds of pro-independence supporters. Our votes are our weapons, they chanted. It was meant as a direct rebuke to Spanish police who tried to prevent Sunday's referendum with batons and rubber bullets. The speaker told the crowd, yesterday we defended our polling stations. Today we have to defend the result. The provisional count announced by the regional government said 90% of votes cast were for Catalonia splitting from Spain. The decision by the central government in Madrid to send thousands of federal police officers to Catalonia to block the ballot has galvanised many independent supporters like Laura.
The citizens were all very pacific. It didn't have to be so hard. We don't want a government that acts like this.
In all, 890 people were injured when riot officers cleared polling stations and seized ballot boxes. 2 suffered serious injuries, but 30 police were also hurt. Speaking in Barcelona, the Catalan leader, Charles Puigdemont, said he was calling for a national investigation into the police action, and he called for European mediation to resolve the standoff. But the Spanish authorities say the poll was illegal. The Constitutional Court had banned it, and the government says fewer than half of Catalonia's electorate voted. The Interior Minister, Rafael Catala, said even tougher measures would be taken if Catalonia tried now to declare independence. And that could mean the central government moving to suspend the autonomy Catalonia already enjoys, both sides entrenching their positions in what is Spain's most serious political crisis in decades.
Damien Chromaticus in Barcelona. Tributes are pouring in for American rock star Tom Petty, who's died at the age of 66 after a cardiac arrest. His family says he died at a Santa Monica hospital surrounded by his bandmates, friends, loved ones. The 66-year-old had just finished a huge tour which wrapped at the Hollywood Bowl last week. CNN's Stephanie Elam has more.
Tom Petty's music embodied the essence of rock and roll. Freedom, truth, and rebellion. With a career that spanned more than half a century, Petty was hailed by some as a musical poet.
Music, as far as I've seen in the world so far, is the only real magic that I know. Just something really honest and clean and pure, and it touches you in your heart.
Petty grew up in Gainesville, Florida during the 1950s.
Don't kiss me.
He met the king, Elvis Presley, on a movie set when he was just 11 years old. That was the moment, Petty says. His life was forever changed, and he became hooked on rock and roll. By 1974, Petty's Gainesville band, Mudcrutch, was California bound. The country rock quintet landed a record deal in L.A.
I live on the west side.
Mudcrutch disbanded a short time later, and in 1975, Petty formed a new band that included 2 other Mudcrutch originals.
I really think I'm in one of the best rock and roll bands in the world.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers became pioneers of the Heartland rock movement. Their straightforward rock and roll sound and unpretentious lyrics generated a string of hits and catapulted the band into international fame. Breakdown. Don't Do Me Like That. Refugee. And The Waiting. Later, as a solo act, Petty's Southern-influenced sound brought a new wave of success, Free Fallin'. I Won't Back Down.
No, I won't back down.
And You Don't Know How It Feels. In 1985, Petty's quirky persona found a new outlet, music television. He played the Mad Hatter in Don't Come Around Here No More. And years later, a mortician in Mary Jane's Last Dance.
Last dance with Mary Jane. One more time to kill the pain.
By some accounts, the same uncompromising spirit that made Petty a musical craftsman also fueled his notorious legal clashes with his record labels over the rights to his songs and the price of his albums. And he declared bankruptcy in 1979 to get out of a bad record deal. and launched a lawsuit tour to pay for the legal fees. Petty's music legacy includes more than 25 albums and countless awards, including 3 Grammys. In 2002, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Petty's prolific journey was immortalized in the 4-hour documentary Running Down a Dream in 2007.
People often stop me and say, hey, thanks, you've been the soundtrack of my life. What more can you ask for than for those songs to touch somebody that way? It's just beautiful.
That report from CNN. A lovely email from Ellen. Country music and Tom Petty, 2 great gifts which represent so much of what I love about the USA. Yet thanks to their crazy gun laws and a strange propensity for producing truly crazy people, the juxtaposition of the massacre at Vegas and Tom Petty's sad death today leaves me once again confounded by America and caught between loving her and feeling angry and frustrated with her. That country that contributes so much also has so very many issues. I feel for them. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you for all your feedback. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The head of a panel investigating the failure of the Edgecumbe flood wall in April says it was lucky no one died when the flood wall breached. An independent review led by Sir Michael Cullen was commissioned after half of Edgecumbe flooded, destroying 15 homes and causing extensive damage to another 250. Releasing the findings today, the panel said the flood wall failed because water found its way underneath the wall and the seepage may have been increased by flaws in the foundation. As well, Sir Michael told Checkpoint residents were not sufficiently aware of the flood risk and there were no evacuation plans.
It needs to be trigger points which are much more realistic for evacuating people from those urban areas. And there's many hours available because you're getting reasonably decent information which tells you that there are likely to be serious problems.
Sir Michael says no one change to the way the flood spillways or adjoining dam were managed could have prevented the breach. The report has made 29 recommendations. The American rock star Tom Petty has died after being rushed to the hospital following a suspected heart attack. Paramedics arrived at the singer's home in California after reports that he had been found unconscious and not breathing. He was rushed to a nearby hospital in Santa Monica. The 66-year-old has just finished a huge tour with his band, the Heartbreakers, which wrapped up at the Hollywood Bowl Arena in Los Angeles last week. The BBC's Tim Ullman reports.
Along with his band, the Heartbreakers, he specialised in melody, intelligence and sincerity. Tom Petty was born in Gainesville, Florida in 1950. His interest in music prompted by a meeting with Elvis Presley when he was 10 years old. He formed the Heartbreakers in the mid-70s, although initially they were more popular in the UK than the US. Later, he would join the rock and roll supergroup The Travelling Wilburys, releasing 2 hugely successful albums. But he would carry on recording and performing with the Heartbreakers almost until the day he died.
Tim Ullman reporting. More medical staff are needed on the Vanuatu island of Espiritu Santo to deal with the influx of evacuees from the volcanic eruption on neighbouring Ambai Island. The superintendent of the Luganville Hospital, Andy Ilo, says its resources are being tested. Mr Ilo says the maternity ward is at 72% capacity and all other wards are already half full. He says normally the wards are never more than 30% occupied. Meanwhile, a New Zealand Defence Force C-130 Hercules has landed on Santo with $250,000 worth of relief supplies on board, including 800 tarpaulins, 800 hygiene kits, 200 mother and baby kits and 5 generators. Police investigating the mass shooting in Las Vegas, America's worst in modern times, say they've found more weapons at the home of the man they say carried out the attack. Stephen Paddock used an automatic weapon to fire on crowds from a Las Vegas hotel, killing 59 people and leaving more than 500 injured. The BBC's Gary O'Donoghue is in Las Vegas.
He clearly did prepare, in the sense that he had well over a dozen weapons in the room in the hotel, and he had a whole load of other weapons at a property he owned in Mesquite, north of the city. It turns out there were traces of explosives in his car and at his home as well, thousands of rounds of ammunition. It looks like he was preparing for something. We're also told that even in the hotel room he had these sort of tripods to mount these high-caliber automatic weapons on.
Gary O'Donoghue reporting. A 42-year-old man has been sentenced to 17 years in prison for trying to smuggle 20 kilograms of methamphetamine into Auckland Airport last year. The Czech national Jiří Kupec arrived on a flight from Bangkok with his mother in May. Their bags were searched by customs. The drugs were hidden under false linings in their suitcases. Kupec's mother was also arrested, but the charges were later dropped as an investigation found she had no knowledge of the drugs. Customs spokesperson Bruce Berry says the 20 kilograms of methamphetamine with a street value of $20 million is the largest seizure of the drug at a New Zealand airport. A Carterton man who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2014 has recovered after receiving a stem cell transplant costing nearly $200,000. The disease damages the brain, spinal cord and optic nerves. The treatment is not available here, but the Multiple Sclerosis Society says a growing number of New Zealanders are travelling abroad to have the treatment. Nick Perkins received the stem cell transplant in Singapore and says he has since seen a dramatic improvement in his symptoms.
The fatigue and stuff had gone almost immediately. I've since been to the neurologist and they've measured that there's effectively no measurable disability that I'm displaying. So, you know, I'm just can carry on and live life normally, which is so amazing.
Nick Perkins, who went abroad for MS treatment. It's 6:05. Sport, and the All Blacks flanker Sam Cane says after 2 weeks off, he and the other 4 players who missed Sunday's test against Argentina are eager to end the Rugby Championship in style. The All Blacks have an unassailable lead in the tournament and will retain the championship title no matter the outcome of the test against the Springboks in Cape Town this weekend. Cane, Liam Squires, Sam Whitelock, Lima Sopoaga and Ryan Crotty arrived in South Africa last week, missing the Argentina leg of the tour. Cane says it's good to see the rest of the squad in Buenos Aires, but concedes jet lag has taken its toll.
We got over here Friday night, so a couple of days to adjust. So us 5 boys, we've been hanging out and fizzing for the boys to arrive, whereas everyone stepped off the plane and try guts out the rest of the day. So I think it'll be on us to lift them for the next 24 hours or so.
Sam Cane. The Australian netballers are focusing on containing young New Zealand defender Kelly Jury ahead of the opening Constellation Cup test against the Silver Ferns in Auckland on Thursday night. New Zealand trounced Australia by 10 goals in their last encounter in Invercargill, with Jury causing all sorts of problems for the Australian shooter Caitlin Bassett. The Diamonds coach Lisa Alexander admits Jury has played on their minds since.
Certainly she's somebody that we'll need to be worried about, as in terms of making sure we don't put the ball in her way. But we've got some other things in place and planned for how to counteract Kelly as well, which we're not going to go into. But they're the sorts of things that we need to be doing and playing smart and making sure we don't give her as many opportunities to get ball as she did in that previous test.
Lisa Alexander, that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, counting redcoats. Who were the imperial soldiers serving in New Zealand in the 1860s? Professor Charlotte MacDonald is our history guest tonight, who will tell us about the at least 12,000 imperial soldiers who served in New Zealand in the wars in the 1860s. Where did they come from? Where did they end up going to? More on that tonight. Plus, we have our Nights pundit. Tonight we're talking about the Māori seats, and there's more of our regular features. Join me, Paul Brennan, in for Brian Crump on Nights from 7 tonight, RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, fine spells, isolated showers, mainly in the west. Waitomo to Vanuatu, including Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihepe, fine spells, isolated showers mostly confined to the ranges tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine apart from a few showers today, mainly about the ranges of Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers about the Tararua range and a few evening showers for Canterbury. Full of Westland and Fiordland, isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Otago and Southland mostly fine, however showers spreading north tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers today, mostly fine tomorrow, but cloud increasing towards evening with possible drizzle. It's almost 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Police say they found at least 42 more firearms, explosives and thousands of rounds of ammunition following a raid at the Nevada home of the Las Vegas gunman. 64-year-old Stephen Paddock killed at least 59 people and injured more than 520 others as he targeted a 22,000-strong crowd gathered at the Harvest Country Music Festival from his room on the 32nd floor of his Mandalay Bay hotel. Paddock, who'd been at the hotel for 3 days prior to the shooting, then killed himself. Police say he had no criminal history. These witnesses describe the horror unfolding.
I just come out of the bathroom and I heard what was a rat-a-tat-tat, and I thought it sounded like somebody had thrown a brick of fireworks at the front entrance of the VIP entrance down there on the sidewalk. And that went off, and I thought that was really weird, so I walked up to the top of the stairs to go back into the tent, the VIP tent, and the bartenders were saying, get down, there's been a shooting. I'm like, what? As those firecrackers. And they're like, no, get down, and people would start dropping down all around me. And then I jumped down, and I said, I got to get back out there and get my wife, because she was at the front section of the gate closest to the stage. So the Mandalay Bay, the shooter was behind us, shooting down over the top of her, and then down in front on the other side of us.
And we were just sitting in our seats, and it sounded like fireworks. We heard pop, 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 pop. And we looked, and we were looking for like lights, and lights never happened. And then we heard it again, and then all the lights went off on the stage. And then people started running, and we like waited a second because we didn't know if it sounded like, you know how like the speakers blow out? I thought it was like a power surge or whatever. And then people were running. We held off a second, and then she said, get down, get down. So we got down. Everybody was running, and then we were stuck like in that corner over where all the food people were. So we couldn't go anywhere, so we just laid down in the bleachers, and then people had broke through like the barriers where the people were selling the food, so we just got out that way, and we ran out that backside and hid behind the police cars.
My heart's broken for the family, for the people who were lost. It's just in mankind for doing these sick people doing this stuff to innocent people who are just, enjoying life. I'm disappointed.
And then just mass crowds start running at me, and I'm like not even sure what's happening, but I hear there's an active shooter, and I just pick up my guitar and start running, and it was very traumatizing seeing all these people in fear for their lives, and hard for me not to be in fear for my life as well, and I just kind of took off running.
Vox Pop's people, witnesses who were there as it all happened. For many people outside the US, the sickening and tragic mass shootings that convulse the country so regularly are a really confusing spectacle. The US, a modern, technological and ethically based society, is seen by many to have a complete blind spot when it comes to the vexed issue of gun ownership. The Second Amendment, of course, the US Constitution allows it, as the founding fathers of the country were wary of a resurgent British wishing to take back the new republic. The Second Amendment mentions militia, but now in the 21st century, high-powered weapons are everywhere, and gun deaths in the US are a leading cause of death. On average, 93 people a day are killed by guns in the US. The BBC's John Sopel reports.
In Vegas last night, terror, fear and mayhem. In the nation's capital this afternoon, 2,500 miles away, a brooding, reflective silence. There is shock as well as anguish, even though this country has been here so many times before.
He brutally murdered more than 50 people and wounded hundreds more. It was an act of pure evil. In moments of tragedy and horror, America comes together as one, and it always has.
Until now, the worst shootings were the nightclub attack in Orlando, where Omar Mateen killed 49 people in an act inspired by so-called Islamic State. And before that was the killings at Virginia Tech University, when 32 people were killed. But in terms of shock, surely nothing eclipses Sandy Hook in Connecticut, when 20 children aged between 5 and 7 and 5 teachers were killed at their elementary school. An act of brutality so shocking that it moved the then president to tears.
They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own.
Today, lawmakers from Connecticut sought to reopen the age-old debate on gun control. Senator Chris Murphy saying, "It's positively infuriating that my colleagues in Congress are so afraid of the gun industry. It's time for Congress to get off its ass and do something." But gun control is unlikely to go anywhere. The industry in America is huge, and its lobbying organisation has managed to see off any attempts at reform. Indeed, one of the ironies of previous mass shootings is that sales of weapons tend to increase as gun owners fear that new controls might be introduced. But that's unlikely to happen with President Trump, who's allied himself closely to the National Rifle Association.
As your president, I will never, ever infringe on the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Never, ever.
It's estimated there are as many private guns in circulation as there are people, around 300 million. Around 30,000 people die each year in gun-related incidents. That figure includes suicides, accidents and murders. Which means, in the last year, 4 times as many people in the US died from guns than the total number of coalition forces killed in Afghanistan and Iraq during 16 years of war. In his address to the nation, Donald Trump said the American people would be seeking explanations. But the one issue he didn't touch upon was whether gun control could have played a part. The NRA believes that the way you stop a bad man with a gun is to have a good man with a gun. But how that would have helped in the circumstances of Las Vegas last night is anyone's guess.
The BBC's John Sopel. This is the price of freedom, a former Fox News star Bill O'Reilly wrote in a blog stating the Second Amendment is clear. Americans have a right to arm themselves for protection, even the loons. While Hillary Clinton tweeted, "We can and must put politics aside and work together to try and stop this from happening again." How can the US reconcile such different points of view? Well, the US ambassador to New Zealand is Scott Brown, a gun owner and a supporter of the right to be a gun owner, although clearly within the rule of law. Beyond offering thoughts and prayers, can America respond to this gun terror in a meaningful way?
I wish it didn't happen at all, certainly. We try to strike a balance back home where it's a constitutional right to carry and bear arms, as is the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. Our founding fathers, put in place a mechanism so we have certain rights that go with us from birth to grave. And in order to change those rights, you have to go through a process. And that's like New Zealand doesn't have a constitution. It's one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a constitution. We have one. And in order to change one of the constitutional rights, you have to go through a process. That's that check and balance. So when things happen, whether it's in free speech, whether it's in civil rights, we don't react on one instance. We try to go thoughtfully and methodically through those changes. States have the ability to make their own determination, as Connecticut did after Sandy Hook, as New York State has done, as well as other states have done, as Massachusetts, my former state, has done. I've taken and voted on extending the assault weapons ban in Massachusetts, but it was done in a bipartisan manner with the gun owners and the advocates in place together in the same room, working on a bill together, and that's how I think it needs to be done.
You voted to extend the assault weapons ban?
Yes.
And that was particular local legislation in Massachusetts?
It was from the entire state, yeah.
And at odds with what the NRA was lobbying very hard
No,
for?
actually, the Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts, which is a subgroup, they were at the table with us. They actually, because they got other things that were important to them when it came to hunting and other types of gun ownership rights. So there was a conversation like we're having right now. It wasn't like this happens, therefore that needs to happen. Everyone sat down at the table and it passed overwhelmingly, and that was a good thing.
Was it?
Gun ownership and gun rights are very important, but there's also a balance of protecting people's rights, but also protecting people's rights of people to be alive. So we walk that balance every day.
Can I look at the Second Amendment? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that seems to me to reflect 1791 and not 2017. In other words, that's anachronistic, isn't it?
Well, the Supreme Court has had many decisions most recently and will continue to make decisions on all of our laws, whether it's this law or the free speech or freedom of religion. And I think that's appropriate to constantly review and upgrade your laws to fit with modern situations in modern society.
Do you think that stands? Do you think a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, do you think that still
what
stands?
that means to people like me who are gun owners? I mean, I'm a gun owner. I want to have the ability to defend my home if an intruder comes in who's not supposed to be there, who's going to hurt or kill my family. I want to have that right. Will I go and take that gun and go and kill people at a movie theater? Absolutely not, because I'm a law-abiding gun owner. Are there people who have guns illegally that shouldn't have them? Absolutely. Take them away, throw them in jail, don't pass go, don't collect $200. Absolutely. But to take away the ownership rights of law-abiding citizens like me and others who treat and respect the Second Amendment and the right to carry and bear arms and the sanctity of life, I think that's inappropriate. Is there a balance? Should those laws be reviewed all the time? Absolutely. Should they be modified and fixed? I'm all ears. But it's up to the citizens to sit down like I did in Massachusetts and in each individual state and our country to make that determination themselves. So everybody has a seat at the table, everybody has skin in the game.
Is it impossible to get that balancing act right now? Because it seems to me such a tribal division. If you look at what's being reported in the Washington Post since this awful event last night, and that is the kind of money the NRA has spent on donations to Congress members, how on earth do you back up the truck?
Well, I think it's easy because, with full disclosure, the NRA supported me. They supported me in many of my prior elections. I think they gave me in one election about $42,000. And I raised a tremendous amount of money in my political career, but I was the most bipartisan senator in the United States Senate. And when there was an issue like dealing on the gun issue, I just voted how I felt was appropriate.
Were you compromised by that $42,000?
No, we raised way too much money, and so did my opponent.
So when you were voting on anything where the NRA would have a vested interest in you going a certain way, was there something in the back of your head thinking 42 grand from them?
No, with respect, 42 grand was in the political process in the United States. Certainly it's appreciated, but my opponent raised a tremendous amount of money from the teachers unions and a lot of the other special interest groups. So you obviously I try to. I don't want to speak for any of my opponents, but you try to do the right thing and you try to just read the bills, understand them, see how they affect your state, your country, your debt, and your deficit, and vote regardless of party. And there's no vote that I regret taking ever. And I've taken probably over 10,000 votes in my political career, easy 10,000 votes.
So at what stage will Congress be able to do what you described doing in Massachusetts, which is come together in a non-partisan fashion? Now, for me, from afar, that seems like mission impossible.
You say that, but I remember after we had the terrorist attacks, obviously when the Twin Towers went down, I was most proud of Congress when they got together on Capitol Hill steps and were arm in arm and worked together to actually make our country stronger.
Do you think that's a possibility as a result of what's happened in Vegas?
I'm a eternal. If you know anything about me, my mom and dad are married and divorced 4 times each. I lived in 17 houses by the time I was 18. Mom was on welfare, tough upbringing. I'm the eternal optimist. Okay. Eternal optimist. So I'm always optimistic that people of goodwill, and there are a lot of people of goodwill in the United States Congress, Senate, and House who care very deeply about our country and about the people in our country, that they will find some type of common ground to work something out.
One final question. What would that common ground look like if you had your way?
Well, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. We have, like New Zealand and like Paris, France, and we all have very strict gun laws. We have laws, okay? First thing you need to do is enforce the laws. You need to make sure you get all illegal guns off. I don't know if these are legal, illegal. See, I don't know the facts, so I don't want to assume. Let's assume that they were legal. Then the question is, well, how did you get them into the hotel? And was there a breakdown in security? Where was there a breakdown in men? So I want to know what's going on, what's surrounding the facts. I know it doesn't make it any more palatable. Believe me, I do. But I want to I'm one of those people. I need to see it. I need to understand. I need to touch it and feel it. And I want to make sure before I make a decision, I have all the facts in front of me every time I make a decision. I'm not sure if I have that answer yet based on the fact pattern. I had thought that the gun laws in our country were pretty rock solid, especially in my former state of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. There's more of a outdoorsman type of New Zealand. A lot of hunters, a lot of farmers, a lot of sportsmen, a lot of individual target practice people. I can't remember the last time we've had that type of situation in New Hampshire, because you have a strong, active, gun owners group that, polices itself and makes sure that they protect their rights, but they also respect and protect the environment. When they eat what they kill, it's that sort of mentality in New Hampshire. And I can't speak for the rest of the country, but when I see these types of things, obviously it just destroys my heart. It just makes me almost cry. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I'll be honest with you. I don't.
That's US Ambassador to New Zealand, Scott Brown. If you were listening to that rather than watching it at the end, he did seem almost overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task that faces the US trying to achieve the balancing act between gun control and the Second Amendment. Extraordinary state of affairs. It's 6:24. Edgecumbe residents were not sufficiently aware of the flood risk, and there were no evacuation plans in place before the town was flooded in April. That's according to an independent report into the catastrophic failure of Edgecumbe's stop bank released this afternoon. 15 homes were destroyed in the flood. A further 250 were extensively damaged. The review, led by Sir Michael Cullen, who we spoke to earlier in the programme, was commissioned by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. The council's chairman, Doug Leader, joins us now on the phone. Doug, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Did the council, and in fact, long before your time, a series of regional councils let Edgecumbe down?
Look, I think there's some lessons that we've all learnt out of this review. I think in terms of the awareness to the community about what was the flood risk and where were the trigger levels in terms of evacuation, we take that on board, but there were some trigger levels. Those levels, with the benefit of hindsight, were set way too high. So going forward, we have to approach the management of risk and the potential for evacuation of a lot more conservative manner. Now, having said that, the flood that occurred on the 7th of April was well within the confines of the design stop bank at 100 years. They was operating at about 70-year event. However, the event in 2004, the event in 2017 and other smaller freshers have clearly highlighted to Regional Council and to the community that the underlying geology on which these flood banks have been built is inadequate to serve the purpose for what they are now.
And you need replacement flood banks and you need replacement spillways, right? And the point Sir Michael Cullen makes is the fact remains the completion of Reed's floodway and spillway is still some way off. In other words, the problem that led to this event, no, actually Sir Michael Cullen doesn't say that, but he says exacerbated or increased or heightened the impact, has still not been resolved.
And they're fair comments, and again, we take those on as board as well. But the original spillway that was still in place in 2017 was designed back in the 60s. After the event and the flood event, which was again a piping or a breach on the eastern side of that stop bank, the Regional Council of the day went ahead and commissioned some work to improve the spillway and what we referred to as Reed Central Canal, which is an exit strategy for the floodwaters. However, during the course of the deliberations around when that was to be done, it was discovered that the advice the Regional Council had received, and this was confirmed by the panel's deliberations, was inadequate or wasn't sufficient to address the issues that we are now discussing. So even if we had done the work, it was the panel's view that the most likely that breach would have occurred anyway. So we're between a rock and a hard place here. If we'd done the work, we would have been criticised. We haven't done the work because we're looking for a much better solution. What we have to do now is accelerate that solution. which is not going to be easy. It's going to require extensive consultation.
Yes, and I absolutely want to pick that point up here, because you have to accelerate the solution, and it is going to be expensive. And so, Michael Cullen, I think everyone knows now that the sort of flood events that used to happen very rarely are going to happen increasingly often. And this is a big picture question, and I wonder if you can address it. Can regional councils, especially those with relatively small population bases to get rates from, afford to do the work that is required throughout New Zealand?
That's going to be a discussion that we have to have with multiple parties. So we've got to have it with
Can you answer the question, though? Can you afford to do the work that's required?
In terms of continuing to build the historical manner in which we have built stop banks, the answer to that is no. And
so the government has to step up, right?
Well, we need to have discussions with all parties involved in this, because the methodology that was used in the 60s in terms of building these flood protection systems has in recent years been questioned. It's proved to be inadequate in terms of the cost and the geology. So we now have to approach flood management control system, a much wider floodplain with much lower banking systems. Consequently, the banking systems will be cheaper, but we've got what we've got. In order to transition to something more appropriate, it's going to take a while, it's going to take a lot of money, it's going to take a lot of understanding from the communities, but it's a journey we've got to go on.
Yes, certainly. It's the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Chairman Doug Leader joining us now live, and that is a big picture end for communities at risk of flooding, and they will increase in number throughout New Zealand. Big discussion we need to have. Talking of big discussions, well, it's not one we need to have, it's one the US needs to have. Suddenly the inbox lights up with people commenting on the Second Amendment, gun controls, and what America needs to get right. John, this originates from the idea that the population should be able to defend itself from a bad government. Just how is an assault rifle going to stop a cruise missile or a fighter jet, says Steve. Thank you for your feedback. We'll see you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Edgecumbe flood report has found locals were not properly prepared, and it was lucky no one died when the stop bank breached, flooding the town. Heartbreaker Tom Petty has died in California. A Czech national has been jailed for 17 years for trying to smuggle 20 kilograms of meth into Auckland Airport, the largest drug seizure at a New Zealand airport. 5 men have been charged over the killings of an uncle and nephew, whose bodies were found in the Mamaku forest in Bay of Plenty. And relief supplies from New Zealand has arrived in Vanuatu. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kamasi Washington is a saxophone virtuoso who has broadened the audience for jazz epics. I'm Nick Bollinger and I'll be reviewing his latest opus, In the Sampler. Tony Stamp will be discussing a new album from Scottish post-rockers Mogwai, while I look at the legacy of Native American